They called her the Den Mother until the rotors stopped turning. It wasn't a name spoken with malice, but with the casual, patronizing affection young men reserve for women of a certain age who exist on the periphery of their world. Master Sergeant Anya Petrova was a fixture in the swirling dust and relentless sun of Forward Operating Base Kestrel. She was older than their mothers, with lines etched around her eyes that spoke of deserts they had only read about in briefings. Her hair, streaked with a severe gray, was always pulled back in a brutally tight bun that tolerated no dissent. She ran the motor pool supply cage with a silent, unnerving efficiency that both annoyed and pacified the young mechanics who swaggered in and out, smelling of grease and misplaced confidence. She moved with a quiet economy, her presence a low hum beneath the roar of generators and the whine of turbines. She never wasted a word, never made a superfluous gesture. When a soldier needed a specific gasket or a rare torque wrench, she would simply turn, her gaze already fixed on the correct bin, and produce it without consulting the inventory system that the younger NCOs worshipped and she ignored. They saw her as a relic, a lifer who had found a comfortable, dusty shelf to see out her time. The officers, like Colonel Madsen, barely saw her at all. She was part of the background, a necessary but unremarkable cog in the vast, grinding machine of deployment. The dismissal was a cloak she wore as comfortably as her faded utility uniform. It was peaceful. It was safe. It allowed her to simply be, to count the rotations of the earth and breathe, a luxury she had not always been afforded. Inside her, behind the stoic mask and the quiet compliance, was a landscape of memory forged in fire and shadow, a place she never visited but could never leave. The first tremor in their perception came on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of bleached bone. The pride of the base, a state-of-the-art Marauder patrol vehicle, sat dead in the main bay. It wasn't just broken. It was inert, a 10-ton monument to technological failure. A gaggle of young mechanics, led by the perpetually smug Lieutenant Davison, swarmed it like flies. Laptops were plugged into ports, diagnostics running in streams of green text that offered no solutions. Davison, fresh from a prestigious engineering program, spoke in a rapid-fire language of acronyms and schematics, his confidence a shield against his growing panic. The primary ECU isn't communicating with the powertrain control module, he announced, loud enough for the nearby Colonel Madsen to hear. It's a cascade failure. We've tried a hard reboot of the entire system. Nothing. Colonel Madsen, a man whose patience was measured in millimeters, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. That vehicle leads a supply convoy to Outpost Sierra at 0600 tomorrow. That is not a request, Lieutenant. It's a fact. Make it happen. Anya watched from the doorway of her supply cage, polishing a set of calipers with a soft cloth. She could smell the failure. It was a scent of hot, frustrated metal and the faint, acrid odor of ozone from overloaded circuits. She heard the frantic, discordant rhythm of their work. Tools dropped, muttered curses, the shrill beep of another failed diagnostic. They were treating the machine like a computer, trying to solve it with code. They weren't listening to it. Hours bled into one another. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The bay lights cast long, distorted shadows. Davison's team was exhausted, their earlier bravado curdled into sullen frustration. We need to fly in a new ECU from the depot, Davison finally told the colonel, defeat heavy in his voice. 3 days, minimum. Unacceptable, Madsen snarled. The word was a whip crack in the tense air. Anya finished her task. She placed the gleaming calipers back in their velvet-lined case. She walked out of her cage and approached the silent behemoth. Her steps were soft, making no sound on the oil-stained concrete. "Permission to look, sir," she said. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly without deference. It simply stated a fact. Lieutenant Davison turned, a sneer twisting his lips. "With all due respect, Master Sergeant, this is a multi-million-dollar integrated electronic system. It's a bit more complex than restocking spark plugs." Anya's gaze didn't flicker. She looked past the lieutenant, directly at Colonel Madsen, her eyes clear and steady. The colonel, trapped between an impossible deadline and an incompetent subordinate, saw something in her gaze he hadn't noticed before. Not defiance, but a profound and unshakable competence. A certainty that felt as solid as bedrock. "Look," he grunted, waving a dismissive hand. "Whatever. Don't break it any more than my genius lieutenant already has." Davison flushed with anger and embarrassment. He and his team stepped back, their expressions a mixture of scorn and curiosity. They watched as Anya ran a bare hand over the cool steel of the Marauder's fender, a gesture almost like a caress. She didn't open a laptop. She didn't consult a screen. She closed her eyes. She was listening. She placed her palm against the main engine housing, feeling for a vibration that wasn't there. She moved along the vehicle's flank, her touch light, her senses extended. She was communing with the machine, searching for the break in its spirit, the point where its steel soul had faltered. The young mechanics exchanged mocking glances. To them, it looked like some kind of primitive ritual. She stopped near the rear wheel well, her head cocked. She knelt, her knees hitting the concrete without a sound. She pulled a small inspection mirror and a penlight from her pocket. She didn't crawl under the chassis. She angled the mirror up into a dark recess near the fuel assembly, a spot shielded by armor plating and ignored by the diagnostic sensors. Her light caught something. "I need a T40 Torx driver and a 6-inch extension," she said quietly, not looking up. One of the younger soldiers, a private named Evans who she had once helped rethread a stripped bolt without making him feel stupid, scrambled to his feet. "Yes, ma'am," he yelped and sprinted to a toolbox. He returned, holding out the tools like a surgeon's assistant. Anya took them. Her movements inside the cramped space were impossibly precise. There was a soft click, a faint scraping sound, and then she withdrew her hand. In her palm lay a small, black sensor, no bigger than her thumb. A tiny, almost invisible crack ran through its plastic housing. "The ground velocity sensor," she stated, holding it up. "There's a hairline fracture. It's feeding the ECU a 0 km/h reading. The system thinks the vehicle is encased in concrete, so the failsafe has locked down the entire powertrain. It's designed to prevent catastrophic damage during a rollover." Davison stepped forward, snatching the sensor from her hand. He stared at it, his mouth agape. But the diagnostics didn't show any fault with that sensor. "The diagnostics look for an electronic failure," Anya said, her voice flat. "The sensor hasn't failed. It's working perfectly. It's just telling the computer a lie, because it's broken. You have to listen to the silence, Lieutenant. The machine was telling you what was wrong by what it wasn't doing." She stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. "There's a replacement in bin 7C, third shelf back. Labeled auxiliary sensors, Class B. You should have it installed in 5 minutes." She turned and walked back toward her cage without another word. A stunned silence filled the bay. Then Private Evans broke it, sprinting to bin 7C. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Davison, his face a mask of humiliated disbelief, torqued the new sensor into place. He climbed into the driver's seat, his hand trembling as he reached for the ignition. He pressed the button. The Marauder's engine erupted with a deafening, perfectly tuned roar. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, every system green. Colonel Madsen stared from the roaring engine to the figure of the woman disappearing into the shadows of her supply cage. He had been on this base for 8 months and had never truly seen her before. Now, he felt like he was looking at a ghost. The name Den Mother suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. From that day on, among the enlisted who had witnessed it, she was no longer the Den Mother. They didn't have a new name for her, only a new tone when they said Master Sergeant. It was a tone of quiet, cautious respect. The second tremor was a month later when the sky fell. A haboob, a monstrous wall of sand and fury, swept down from the northern desert with unexpected speed. It swallowed the base in a blinding, choking maelstrom. The world shrank to a few feet of visibility. The air grew thick and hot, tasting of grit. All flights were grounded. Communications with the outside world degraded into static-laced whispers. And then the call came. A long-range reconnaissance patrol, call sign Pathfinder, was caught in the open 20 clicks from the wire. Their vehicles were disabled, their electronic navigation fried by the storm's massive static charge. They were blind, lost, and taking sporadic fire from insurgents who knew how to use the storm as a cloak. One of them was hit, bleeding badly. They needed an immediate medical evacuation. "Nothing can fly in this," the lead pilot, a cocky captain named Renner, shouted over the howling wind in the command tent. The SAM will strip the paint off the fuselage and choke the turbine intakes in minutes. The Black Hawks are grounded. The drones are useless. Their GPS is shot and optical sensors can't see a thing. It's suicide. Colonel Madsen's face was pale. He stared at the map, at the blinking red that represented the doomed patrol. He was about to order a ground-based rescue, a desperate, high-risk gamble into the teeth of the storm. Anya appeared at the tent flap, a ghost in the swirling dust. She didn't speak to the colonel or the frantic officers. She walked to the hangar chief, a grizzled, old master gunnery sergeant. "The museum piece," she said. "The old UH-1. Does it still have fuel in the tank?" The hangar chief blinked. He was referring to an ancient Huey helicopter, a relic from a different war, kept in a back corner of the main hangar, mostly for sentimental reasons. It had been stripped of most of its advanced avionics decades ago. Its controls were largely analog, its systems ruggedly simple. "It's a wreck, Petrova," the chief grumbled. "Hasn't been properly serviced in a year." "Does it have fuel?" she repeated, her voice cutting through the wind's howl. "Yeah, half a tank, I think." Anya nodded once, turned, and walked toward the hangar. Renner laughed, a harsh, unbelieving sound. "What's she gonna do? Dust it for prints?" But Colonel Madsen watched her go, the memory of the marauder still fresh in his mind. He followed her, a silent procession of curious and skeptical pilots and crew chiefs trailing behind him. They found her in the dim light of the back hangar, the storm hammering against the metal walls. She had already thrown open the Huey's engine cowling. Her hands were a blur, moving with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. She wasn't repairing it. She was tuning it, adapting it. She rerouted a secondary intake line, bypassing the main filter she knew would clog. She tightened belts, checked fluid levels, her touch both diagnostic and reassuring. She moved around the aircraft, her hands seeming to know every rivet, every wire, every hydraulic line by heart. It was a dance of profound intimacy. "That bird isn't certified for flight," Renner said, standing with his arms crossed. "No pilot on this base is rated for it. And even if they were, no one is stupid enough to fly in this." Anya slammed the cowling shut. She wiped her greasy hands on a rag and faced them, her eyes catching the dim hangar light. "I'm rated for it," she said simply. She walked to a small, dusty locker in the corner, pulled out a flight helmet that looked as ancient as the helicopter and a set of worn flight papers. She handed the papers to the stunned hangar chief. They were yellowed with age, but the certifications were all there, all valid. Master Sergeant Anya Petrova. Rotary wing aircraft, multiple models, including the UH-1 series, with special qualifications for adverse weather conditions. She put on the helmet. "I'll need a medic and a kit," she said to the air, "and someone on short-range comms to talk me toward their last known coordinates. I'll handle the rest by sight and sound." A young medic, terrified but determined, scrambled forward with his gear. Captain Renner just stared, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only raw disbelief. This quiet, middle-aged woman, this supply clerk, was not just a master mechanic, but a pilot of a machine he considered a death trap. "I'll be your co-pilot," a voice said. It was Private Evans, the young soldier from the motor pool. He couldn't fly, but he refused to let her go alone. Anya gave him a short, sharp nod. "Strap in." The hangar doors groaned open into a wall of roaring brown. Anya didn't hesitate. She climbed into the pilot's seat, her hands moving over the analog controls with the familiarity of a lover's touch. The turbine whined to life, the old rotors beginning to beat against the heavy, sand-filled air. The sound was different from the sleek Black Hawks. It was a deeper, guttural thwomp thwomp thwomp, a heartbeat of pure, stubborn power. She lifted off, not fighting the storm, but yielding to it, using the currents of wind to her advantage. She flew low, a terrifying 10 feet off the desert floor, navigating by instinct and by the faint outlines of terrain features that only an experienced eye could discern. In the command tent, they listened to the comms, their own breathing suspended. Her voice was preternaturally calm, punctuated by the rhythmic thump of the rotors. Kestrel Command, this is Ghost. I am low level, proceeding on Vector 090. Tell Pathfinder to pop a single flare on my command. A silence fell over the command tent. Ghost. It was a call sign no one recognized. It sounded old, mythical. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, her voice again, calm as ever. Flare spotted. On final approach. Tell them to prepare for dust-off. They heard the sounds of gunfire through her open mic, a frantic exchange. Then nothing but the roar of the wind and the Huey. More silence. Finally, after 20 minutes that felt like 20 years, the unmistakable heartbeat of the old helicopter grew louder. The Huey materialized out of the storm, battered and sand-scoured, and settled onto the landing pad with impossible grace. The medic and Evans jumped out, helping unload 2 members of the Pathfinder team, one on a stretcher. They were alive. All of them. Anya cut the engine. The silence that followed was immense. The entire base, it seemed, was standing in the wind, watching. As she climbed down from the cockpit, her face streaked with grime, Captain Renner walked up to her. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, then at the ancient helicopter that had just done the impossible, and then back at her. He raised his hand in a slow, formal salute. It was a gesture of complete and utter surrender to a skill he could not comprehend. The final revelation did not come in a storm or from a broken machine. It came with the polished boots and crisp uniform of a visiting legend. General Thorne was a 4-star, the theater commander, a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. He was from the old school, forged in the silent conflicts that never made the news. His visit sent a wave of anxiety through Kestrel. Colonel Madsen drilled his men relentlessly, wanting everything to be perfect. The general's tour of the base was a whirlwind of salutes and stiff presentations. He walked within Predator's coiled energy, his pale blue eyes missing nothing. He seemed perpetually unimpressed by the advanced technology, the data streams, the confident young officers who presented their briefings. He offered curt nods, his expression unreadable. His tour route eventually took him past the motor pool. Anya was where she always was, in her element. She was elbow deep in the engine of a Humvee, her back to the approaching officers, her focus absolute. "And this is our motor pool, General," Colonel Madsen said, his voice slick with practiced deference. "Kept in top shape. Master Sergeant Petrova here is an exceptional mechanic." The hesitation was slight, but it was there. He still didn't know what to make of her. General Thorne gave the scene a cursory glance, his gaze sweeping over the greasy coveralls and the tight bun of gray hair. He was about to move on when the alert sirens blared across the base. It was a drill, part of the demonstration for the general, a simulated complex attack. Everyone snapped into motion. Soldiers sprinted to defensive positions. The practiced, chaotic ballet of a base on high alert began. In the manufactured urgency, a stack of heavy supply crates, jostled by a sprinting soldier, teetered and fell. It happened in slow motion. Anya, turning from the engine, was in the path. She tried to move, but there wasn't time. The corner of a heavy wooden crate struck her forearm, smashing it against the Humvee's fender. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain, and crumpled to one knee. A medic was on her in a second. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "Let me see." Blood was welling from a deep gash in her forearm, soaking the sleeve of her coveralls. The medic, a young corporal, took out a pair of shears and cut the fabric away to get to the wound. "It's a nasty one, ma'am. Going to need stitches." As the blood-soaked sleeve fell away, something was revealed on the skin of her upper forearm. It was a tattoo, faded by years of sun and time, but its lines were still sharp, still clear. It was not the usual emblem of a division or a battalion. It was a single, stylized black wing, intricately entwined with a coiled serpent. At the heart of the design, where the wing met the serpent's head, was a single, stark five-pointed star. It was an image of dark, lethal grace, an insignia that belonged to no official record. A myth. General Thorne had been observing the drill with a critical eye, but the medic's activity drew his attention. He took a step closer, his gaze falling on Anya's arm. He stopped. The world seemed to stop with him. The air left his lungs. The hard, granite mask of the four-star general dissolved in an instant, replaced by a look of profound, heart-stopping shock. The booming command voice that had terrified colonels was gone. "No," he whispered. The sound was ragged, torn from his throat. He moved then, pushing past the bewildered Colonel Madsen, past the concerned medic. He moved as if in a trance, his eyes locked on the tattoo. He dropped to one knee in the grease and dust beside Anya, his movements stiff, disbelieving. His hand, scarred and powerful, reached out, trembling. He didn't touch her wound. His finger hovered over the faded ink of the black wing. Then his voice came, louder this time, not a command, but a scream of raw, agonizing recognition that sliced through the air. "Valkyrie!" The entire area fell silent. The drill, the sirens, the running soldiers, it all faded into a distant, meaningless hum. Every eye turned to the kneeling general and the wounded NCO. "It can't be," Thorne choked out, his eyes wide, swimming with a flood of ghosts. He looked from the tattoo to her face, truly seeing her for the first time in 20 years. The lines of age, the streaks of gray, they all melted away, and he saw the woman he remembered from smoke-filled briefing rooms and whispered communiques. "Oh no, we listed Ukiah on the Zargos Ridge. We held a memorial. I wrote the letter to your family myself." Anya looked up at him. The pain from her arm was a distant thing. The landscape of memory she kept locked away had just been breached. She knew him. He was younger then, a driven captain in intelligence. They had called him Oracle. He was the one who sent them into the dark. She took a slow, steadying breath. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but it carried across the silent yard. Each word weighed down with 2 decades of unspoken history. "The mission was completed, General." The words hung in the air. The mission was completed. It was all the explanation she would ever give. It spoke of survival against impossible odds, of a long road back from a place no one was meant to return from, of a silence she had chosen to keep. General Thorne stared at her, the legendary, untouchable commander completely undone. The tattoo on her arm was the sigil of Task Force Aegis, a unit so secret that its existence was officially denied. They were the ghosts the military sent when angels feared to tread. They were all believed to be dead, lost in the shadow wars of a bygone era. And Valkyrie had been their best. He slowly, reverently, helped her to her feet, his hands gentle on her good arm. He stood before her, not as a 4-star general to a master sergeant, but as a man humbled before a living legend he had mourned for half his life. Colonel Madsen and Lieutenant Davison and Captain Renner stood frozen, their faces a tableau of utter, world-altering shock. The woman they had dismissed, the den mother, the quiet mechanic, was a hero from a forgotten war, a ghost in their midst. Private Evans, watching from a distance, bent down and picked up the simple, clean rag Anya had dropped. He folded it carefully, holding it in his hands like a sacred text. Anya Petrova stood steady, her gaze clear. She did not need the awe, or the reverence, or the sudden, suffocating respect. She had walked out of the shadows once. All she had ever wanted was to be left in the quiet of the sun. But the past, she knew, had a way of leaving its mark, not just on the skin, but on the soul. And sometimes, it took a scream to remind the world that true legends never really die. They just find a quiet place to work until they are needed again.